Score, the podcast. The only show taking you inside the studios of the world's most celebrated composers and musical storytellers.
Kenny Holmes and Robert Kraft here for another week of Score, the podcast. Robert, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Summer is here. It's heating up. And Score, the podcast, is heating up. We are really excited about how our numbers are growing. That means you, the listener.
Yeah.
You must be telling your friends.
Yeah, and please continue to do so. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Score the Podcast. We're always posting little clips of, we do little video clips to kind of show you what the scene looks like, set the scene for you in your mind. In fact, my mom messaged me and she's like, can you send me a picture before I listen to the episode so I know what the people are wearing and what they look like? And it makes me visualize it better. So, yeah, we're very excited about today's guest as well, Benjamin Wallfisch. He is on a tear right now.
He sure is. He's just a huge talent.
Huge talent. And just this past year, he had 2 movies come out within 6 days of each other, Hellboy and Shazam. And the scores for both of those were polar opposites, but they were incredible. And he also has It 2 coming out this fall. So he's been super busy, and he's moving into a new studio. So we're going to have him join us as opposed to going into his studio.
I want to find out, did he write Hellboy from like 9 a.m. to 5:30, right, then break for an hour to have a little dinner, and then
cleanse the palate?
Right. Shazam, 7 to midnight every single day. I want to figure out how he did that.
That just sounds terrifying.
Terrifying.
But he did it with grace, and the sounds were amazing. So we're going to get to Ben in just a bit. I wanted to bring up this whole thing about Swamp Thing. The show came out, and it's on DC's kind of paid platform, which I wasn't even really that familiar with, but
apparently no one was.
Everyone's doing their own a la carte, platform these days. And Swamp Thing came out with 1 episode, and the Rotten Tomatoes score was great. And people were apparently liking it, and they come out and say it's canceled. And it was, I think the internet response was outrage, like everything else. But there was a hashtag trending, Save Swamp Thing, and people were already, going to support it. And this happened with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and NBC ended up picking it up. So it's worked before, but why would do you have any experience in this happening where a show comes out with 1 episode and gets canceled? And it seems a little premature.
I, first of all, of course, have no idea what the internal workings are of DC and the Swamp Thing production. My only guess is, even though the Rotten Tomatoes reviews were good, either the viewership they clocked was way down from what they anticipated, or, needless to say, sometimes the expense of making one particular show, you start to pencil it out and you see that you're going to just lose money with that level of interest that they were clocking, and they said it's better to get out.
If you have a platform like this, though, where it's paid, you got to expect that the numbers are going to be low because you're introducing a whole new platform that people, like I said, I'm pretty aware of what's out there as far as platforms, and I wasn't even really that familiar with the DC streaming service. So
did DC have any response like, here's why we canceled it?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
And we reached out to Brian Tyler, and he hasn't responded yet, but he did the music for it, and it'd be interesting to see what he thinks of the response on social media, because the fans get behind stuff, and if they make enough noise, someone may rescue this thing.
More will be revealed.
It would be cool. It would be a cool little superhero moment.
They might
for
make
the
it
show.
kind of a New Orleans show called Swamp Thing. You never know. Could go a whole different direction. I think that's it. Ooh, there's a good one.
So we'll keep an eye on the Swamp Thing situation. I also thought it was interesting that the new Batman, the producer of Batman, what's the producer? Anyway, he tweeted out the announcement of Twilight dude
JJ
being Batman. No, the actor.
Robert Pattinson.
We'll
get it together this morning. Stick with us. We're drinking coffee.
Carol's researching it here. You can speak.
Oh, Matt Reeves.
Oh, Matt Reeves.
So Matt Reeves tweeted out that the announcement of Robert Pattinson
Yes.
was like the official tweet.
Yep.
And it was liked by Michael Giacchino.
Is he going to work on the music, you think?
I mean, you're kind of putting it out there. Giacchino, is Giacchino going to do? I mean, they work together on Planet of the Apes, I think, and some other things.
Nice.
So, very interesting.
Can't go wrong with Michael Giacchino.
Subtweeting a little bit.
Subtweets.
So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on
us posted.
the news for
and
that.
Listeners, if you get any data, Swamp Thing, Batman composers, send us the information. We will give you exactly no credit and take it all for ourselves.
Robert, you're getting excited about the Hollywood Bowl season.
Always excited to see the Hollywood Bowls line up for movie music because they've really been, for this kind of presentation of live to picture, the Hollywood Bowl has been a leader in, I think, in the world, certainly in the United States, of doing these incredible shows where they show a movie and the orchestra is on stage playing the live picture in time, the way it was intended to be. So they have some big ones coming up. They have on June 29th, the LA Phil will be playing Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Actually, that's the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra on June 29th. And then the LA Phil is doing Jurassic Park. Who among us can sing the Jurassic Park theme?
Carol's hating the key I'm in right there.
Okay.
Thank you very
much. That was
much.
Interesting. It was kind of the spooky Jurassic Park theme.
It was like the one from... Oh, there she goes. It was kind of like... I was doing the scary Jurassic World one where it was like a little terrifying on the trailer.
That was Jurassic World. Well, they're going to do Jurassic Park in concert August 16th with David Newman conducting. That's exciting for us because he's coming up as a guest. Can I give that away? David Newman on Score the Podcast.
Who's also doing West Side Story with Spielberg.
One of my favorite composers. A lot to talk about.
I want to say this. We talk about the Hollywood Bowl sometimes on the show, and if you don't live in Hollywood, you're probably like, I wish I could go, or I don't even know what that is. The Hollywood Bowl is a legendary venue, and they really have made film music concerts. They keep them alive, and they're starting to spread around the country now and the world, and you see it now. But, John Williams has been doing these summer shows here for how long? I don't know, 20, 30 years?
And this summer, 3 nights of Maestro Williams, August 30, 31, and September 1st.
You should book your trip and come see John Williams do this show because, as we all know, like he's retiring. We don't know how much longer he's going to do this or be able to do this. And I've been to the show a few times now, and it's really something special. And it's for, people from all different eras. They go through all these different movies, and it's really incredible to see him do this in front of a large audience. So.
18,000 people outside on a beautiful Los Angeles evening. And that feeling when you go to a band and they play hit after hit record and you go, oh, I love this. Oh, I love this. John Williams, every single theme that he plays, you go, oh, that's right.
And the cool thing is you can bring your own food and drinks. You can pack a basket and bring your wine and cheese or beers or whatever.
Are we getting compensated by the
Probably
Hollywood
not.
Bowl? We should get some couple free tickets because we're here selling the show, but it's worth selling. They
Just
really
come
support
see
film
John
music.
Williams do the show. John Williams do the show as soon as possible because we never know how much longer these shows are going to go on, and it's happening this summer, so do it.
Wasn't there some news this week about the Emmys and their recognition of documentaries?
Yes, they're going to now be recognizing original documentary scores, which
That's
they haven't been doing
fantastic.
before. And was it...
It's Miriam Cutler really deserves the credit. She's a great composer. She's a composer that deserves credit as a composer. She hasn't gotten it, but here she deserves a lot of credit as an advocate for recognizing the fact that original music in documentaries is significant and has not been acknowledged. And she's finally gotten the Emmys to acknowledge it and to create an award for best original score for a documentary.
And she made a good case. They're looking at this as documentaries are independent. Oftentimes the composers are people you haven't heard of before, which opens up the door for, gender and diversity and all of these problems that Hollywood has and is trying to solve these problems. And this opens up that door. You're going to recognize a composer that this may be their first work, or first couple of works, and they're doing a documentary, and if they're standing up there getting an Emmy for it, that may be the next step to them getting another job.
A big gig.
The big wigs of the industry are watching these award shows and hearing these names. And sometimes that recognition, the talent is all out there, but sometimes you just need your name to be put on a sign in front of someone's face, and then they get elevated.
Miriam deserves awards, I guess, and certainly the credit. She's for 2 big documentaries she scored recently, RBG, the notorious RBG, which was about our Supreme Court justice, and The Hunting Ground. But Miriam's a wonderful composer, huge talent, and now an advocate, politically motivated. Thank you, Miriam.
Couple of movies coming out this weekend. Kind of a shocker at the box office that no one expected. Secret Life of Pets knocked out Dark Phoenix.
Yeah, and both of them actually underperformed. They both were disappointments to their respective studios. Life of Pets did half of what the original Life of Pets did, and Dark Phoenix was the weakest opening of any X-Men movie. So there is a feeling this morning that sequelitis is a disease that needs a cure in Hollywood.
And it's a little sad that, this is one of those examples where Hans Zimmer's music for Dark Phoenix is awesome, but the movie's just going to disappear.
Hope it doesn't hurt his career.
Yeah, I think he'll be okay.
Okay.
Men in Black International coming out this weekend.
MIB.
Danny Elfman back again, and he's working with Chris Bacon.
Chris Bacon, who I've known, he's worked with a number of different composers. This will be a big step for Chris. It's directed by F. Gary Gray, who did Straight Outta Compton.
Oh, yeah.
So it'll be a rockin' movie, should be.
Shaft, but I didn't even know they were doing another Shaft.
They didn't either.
And it's just called Shaft again? There's not even like Shaft 2 back shafting around or something?
The Shaft returns.
Return of the Shaft.
Scored by my friend Chris Leonard.
Yeah, Chris Leonard.
Going to see that. Chris is just awesome composer. So this should be fun. Also, a big doc coming up this weekend, The Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan story. In 1975, there was a huge tour that Martin Scorsese captured on film with Dylan and all kinds of great rock stars, not unlike The Last Waltz, which he did with the band. And this will be so interesting to see. It's just exciting for fans of music and fans of that era, and also fans of Scorsese, because he's so good with music.
It's cool to see these big directors doing these music documentaries too. Ron Howard's been doing it, and Scorsese. It's kind of like they have these big studio films, but then they have a passion project that it's probably not worth it to them to do it, other than for the creative outlet.
God bless them, and in fact, God bless passion projects. I think those are sometimes the genesis of some of the greatest work, is when people do things not for the money, but because they love it. And
I think we're going to
this
learn.
podcast, for example.
Yeah. I was going to say.
Of course, we're doing. I mean, they show up with the Brinks truck shows up at our door every morning with just the incredible amount of cards and letters from our fans. Thank you. That must be him.
Delivery. That's not the doorbell. That's
it's the bank.
Well, we're going to hear a lot about working on big projects coming up in just a moment. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're joined by Grammy and Golden Globe nominated composer Benjamin Wallfisch. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, Score fans, it's Kenny. Now that Season 2 is going strong, you can look good while you're listening. We just released the official Score the Podcast t-shirt. There's multiple colors and sizes for men, women, and children. And they're super soft. I just got a few myself. They fit really nice, and they feel great, and they look cool. So go to score-movie.com/store. Check those out, and you can also get a copy of Score, a film music documentary on Blu-ray, and our interview bonus disc that has the extended interviews from the film. So plenty to check out, score-movie.com/store, and get your shirt today.
Steven Spielberg and George Lucas.
What about strange lands and escape from the everyday? It's brilliant, George.
Before anyone knew them by name.
Who's a good boy, Indiana?
400 grand?
Let me explain.
George, that's our money.
Blockbuster.
Everybody, take cover!
Following the spectacular failures.
Sir, are you all right?
And the unexpected triumphs.
Can you believe it?
I told you, George. I told you.
A 6-part immersive audio series. Blockbuster. Experience the entire 6-part series ad-free on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all other platforms.
Hello, this is Stephen Price. You're listening to Score the Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
Welcome back. We are so happy for our guest who's joining us today, Benjamin Wallfisch, Golden Globe and Grammy-nominated composer. Ben, we've been trying to make this happen. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Ben's here. We're at Kraft Box Studios today because you are in the process of building a monster.
Yeah. It's quite an undertaking. Yeah, I've decided to build a little studio in Santa Monica, and when you start something like that, you never quite know what you're taking on. So hopefully we'll get that done this year.
Did you normally work out of your home studio, or what? How did this all come about?
I've been very kindly, Hans and Steve Bukowski over at Remote Control invited me to rent a room from them for a number of years. So I've been there since, I guess, 2013 now, actually. Fantastic spot to be, a lot of friends there. It's an incredible sort of creative hub. I've been based there for a while, and I'm going to be still keeping a couple of rooms there, but also, just expanding a little bit further east onto 20th Street.
And what are you going to call your studio?
It's going to be called the Scoring Lab.
The Scoring Lab.
Like that.
But it's kind of two businesses in one. There's a business called the Mix Lab, which is a Dolby Atmos mix room, which has turned into the headache. It's exciting. We just got Dolby to certify it. It took a few months.
Amazing.
But it's exciting. It's got 22 speakers, and we're going to town. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I wonder if you will be so busy all the time that these rooms will be occupied and no one else will get into them.
Who knows? But no, the idea is that it's primarily for other people to come in and use, not just composers, but also sound mixers and pre-mixers. It's because of the certification. You can there's a lot of possibilities.
Well, and there's not a lot of Dolby Atmos is kind of a newer thing for studios, right? So that you're going to be the cool studio on the block.
It's an incredibly interesting format. I mean, we did an experiment just now with Shazam, recording with overhead microphones, which are actually, they weren't directly over the orchestra, but they were up in the gods at Air Studios, and just to see what happens when we sort of did a fake Atmos mix, because we weren't actually delivering a full Atmos deliverable, but it was fascinating the perspective it gives you when you can just channel those very high gallery mics above the audience. The perception of depth was fascinating.
How would you describe Dolby Atmos to somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about?
Well, I hate to pretend I'm an expert, because I'm not. I'm still learning. But from what I understand, I've been really trying to educate myself. It's a kind of natural evolution of the idea of surround sound, which obviously started with a very basic thing of having 3 speakers at the front and 1 surround, and then there were 2, which is 5.1, and then 7.1, where you have mid speakers. And what Dolby Atmos does is create this. It's basically a 916. I don't actually know what the numbers are.
There's a lot of speakers.
It's basically you have 9, and this is by the way home theatrical, because the theatrical is a whole other thing. You have on this plane 9 speakers, and then you have 6 channels above you, and then you have a sub. But there's also these, it might even be 7, I don't know the number, but then the whole idea is that can scale to any size. You could have 100 speakers, and you have this thing called objects and a bed, and the bed is kind of like the basic thing, but then you have objects which you can move, and when you export, it creates a sort of set of metadata so that you can upscale or downscale depending on the size of the space. So instead of having to second guess whether a theater will have the exact speakers you have, you actually can kind of, it will automatically adapt. So even in a very small theater, you'll have a very good experience, versus the Chinese theater or something.
That makes me wonder, because when you're writing a score, you've got to write a score for like 5,000 different settings of speakers. So how much does Atmos play into if someone's listening to it in stereo versus 100 speakers? The core of the score still has to make sense to everyone watching it, no matter what type of speakers they're listening to.
I think the key thing is to leave that to the people who really know what they're doing. That's the dubbing engineer.
Excellent answer.
The re-recording makes. I mean, for Blade Runner, for example, it was a case of delivering a lot of stems in 5.1, and then it was just this incredible process where that was effectively upmixed into something that was just like a sonic experience. But that is the artistry of those guys who do that every day.
So they pick and choose. And stems, for those that don't know, that's every little piece of the score broken down into each little section. So you can put one sound of the trombones in one speaker and
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the score, because something like Shazam, it was all about kind of capturing this old-fashioned sound, which I grew up with and was in love with, still am, where you have the whole orchestra playing together at the same time and kind of balancing within a group. And in that case, you're going to have... there you go.
Wonderful.
He's smiling. That's great.
I want you to finish your answer, but even a cue like that, I wonder, do you write on paper?
That's a really interesting question. So I do tend to sketch. It's actually on an iPad now, but yes, there's a process of...
Tell me about the iPad sketching. Is it actually...
It's manuscript
staff paper comes up?
Yep. Yeah, it's just... It's
and with an iPad pen?
With an iPad pen, yeah. I found myself just... The book kept falling on my keyboard and recording random MIDI notes. So yes, an iPad was helpful. But no, it's funny because sometimes you just have an idea completely randomly, and by the time you've selected the MIDI track and gone in to record, it might not quite be there. So sometimes just scribbling it down, but just even if it's just like a couple of chords. But something about that, I mean, particularly with Shazam, it was this thing of, how can we get past the sometimes agony of mocking up a cue, especially when it's that dense an orchestration, because you can spend easily a day on 10 seconds of mock-up when it's that dense. And what I tried to do was completely bypass that and write the entire score in kind of the equivalent of a short score in MIDI, but only using piano tracks. So effectively I had 12 piano tracks, and in my head the top one was the woodwind, the next one was going to be the low woodwind and brass and strings, and then I'd expand, and effectively all I had then were the notes. And it was this great thing where you can actually build momentum and build a sense of, okay, I might be getting somewhere, because it's half the time you're second guessing is this completely horrible. Well, yeah,
you're lucky.
Half the time, and then the other half is like probably
third guessing,
throwing that half away.
So, but did you play that built-up piano score for the director and have him understand what was going on?
I didn't on this occasion, because there was a good amount of time to kind of go through that process and then do a MIDI orchestration. But yeah, I mean, probably if we had less time, I might well have done that. And it was great just because it kind of opened up this. It was a new way of working for me, and really exciting to just that the discipline of you only have the notes was it was terrifying at first, but then of course it was liberating, because you didn't have to worry about programming a timpani roll and all those things that go back into it.
You are uniquely qualified. I mean, you mentioned two scores already, and they almost could be by two different composers, Blade Runner and Shazam.
Yeah.
One of the things that's remarkable about the work you've done in it is score to score. There is a sense of this is appropriate for the movie. It's not, this is a Benjamin Wallfisch score applied to another story. And I think that just talent-wise is exceptional, but it makes me wonder, when you approach, for example, a kind of highly electronic score, is it the same approach? Is it all done in the box? Is it something that you feel, I got this, or shoot, I'm really stronger in one arena? Because a lot of composers say there's my zone and then there's not my zone. I don't hear that in your work. I hear, I'm going to score this movie. And by the way, Shazam turns out to be this magnificent, I mean, it's a throwback to an orchestral score that you don't hear very often.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, look, it's Blade Runner. It was so much of it was Hans Zimmer's involvement in terms of how to approach something as monumental as following up this iconic work of art of Vangelis. And I feel so privileged to have been invited into this room with Denis Villeneuve, Joe Walker, and him, and just kind of going into that question with a completely open mind. And it was funny because sometimes, I mean, I find that for me, the scores that I feel most connected to are the ones that really harken back to my own childhood loves. And for Shazam, it was very much my continued obsession with John Williams, but that really started when I was maybe 6, going to see E.T. But I was hugely, hugely excited by synthesizer music growing up in the 80s and 90s of Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre and Moroder and those guys, and also the burgeoning rave scene in London, the Prodigy, all these like really early. I loved this music, and I used to attempt to do it as a kid, but it was something I found myself kind of veering away from when I started, really getting more into classical music and training in that world. But I don't know. I mean, I have a very sort of. I mean, my relationship with Hans is so long-standing, and we're great friends now. And I think when you get to know someone really well, when he called me, I was thinking, well, why me? I'm not really a synth guy at all. But what was really exciting is that through that collaboration I had with him on Blade Runner, and the trust he had in me, and the fact that we were kind of two band members, sort of bouncing off each other the whole time, it sort of gave me the confidence to just attack that score in the same way as I'd attack any score. It just happened to be in a sound world which I hadn't done before, but it was, in the end, it just, as Hans always says, it's all about story and all about finding ways to progress a character's journey through motif and through a sense of, the emotional subtext that a score can bring. And so, yeah, it's a very convoluted answer, but it's in the case of that score. And actually, a lot of it is about collaboration. If it's not with, a co-write like with Blade Runner, it's the collaboration with your filmmakers and being and actively being in a mind state where you are inspired by whatever it is they have to say, or sometimes not say, or just imply. Reading between the lines of a note or a spotting brief. Or even just sort of really looking aside the pace of a cut or the choices they've made with set design, costume, all these things, and you just kind of try and see what's underneath what they're trying to achieve on the surface, and because that's kind of where music lives, is in the subtext.
You're describing what makes a great composer, which is being sensitive to the nuances that a director, a story, a character brings, which is Hans taught me. I used to think that composing was half politics, half music. He said it's a third. Politics, music, and narrative. Yeah. You have to be the storyteller.
That's very true.
So I learned that, and what you're describing, what's interesting is that when you said on Blade Runner, if you weren't familiar with synths as a tool, did you have programmers that you could say, I want kind of a darker, rounder?
That score, there's some really raw modulation, like pushing the speakers where it sounds like your speakers are going to rip out of the box,
right.
As opposed to Shazam, which is so orchestral and beautiful. It's like completely polar opposites, but...
Well, it was a bit like being handed the keys to the Lamborghini, basically, with Blade Runner, because Hans basically gave me his synth library in Zebra, and... I have it's not a guilty pleasure in that I don't sort of try and hide it, but, I am absolutely, as much as orchestral music is my basis, electronic music is equally important, and I've been fascinated with production from the very beginning. I've found myself, mixing some of my scores too. So the finished sonic product for me is incredibly important, and actually when you're using synths as your orchestra, as your primary sound base, it's really just about how, in the same way as you would push an orchestra to perform and bring out the emotion and you do the same thing with the synths, but you are then, the entire orchestra. And I mean, Zebra as a synth, it's this incredible, computer-based synth called by Yuhei. The depth and the power and the sheer immediacy of that instrument is staggering, and also the range of modulation possibilities. But what was interesting too is also what you do after the sound is created, and it was fascinating trying to reproduce Vangelis's kind of effects chain, where he had his huge lexicon reverbs, 25-second reverbs, and before that, you'd have your eventide harmonizers to create that incredible stereo depth of field. And all those things are reproduced now by Universal Audio, very accurate, plug-in reproductions, and just kind of like analyzing the sound and sort of matching it. But then because we're in the digital domain, the possibilities are that much greater. It was an incredibly exciting thing.
How much do you channel the original score, and then like where does the line get drawn where you want to do your own thing, but you also pay homage? Because there's, we're living in the era of reboots and sequels and callbacks to these films, and this comes up a lot.
Well, I think the Blade Runner score, the Vangelis score, is quite unique in some respects in that sonically it's completely its own thing. It's unlike any other score. And as such, it's hugely important to the overall world of Blade Runner. It's really as part of the fabric as, the rain, effectively, and the all of the incredible tropes that are Blade Runner, only Blade Runner. And so as such, it was a case of embracing it as much as it is so fundamental to our basic language. But then the big challenge was then how do we reinvent that for a completely different story, and one which is much more existential in many ways, and has asks so many difficult questions, and it's much more personal in so many ways. Kay's journey through that film and the maze he's in, and there's a puzzle which gets ever more complex. And so, we started to introduce ideas of a puzzle theme, these piano chords, and then there was, the horse motif, which is, the visual symbol of this wooden horse, which repeats at certain key moments in the story as the puzzle becomes more complex. That needed a theme. There's the Mesa theme, Hans's tune, which is just so kind of majestic and open. There was a sense that, Vangelis, it was present in the sonic choices, or at least the sense of, you have to pay respect to that. But almost more important than that is the story, of course. And Denis' vision, he has such an unbelievable scope, and he's such an inspiring director, and he really understands what was extraordinary was how he balanced the sound design and the music, and he knew when he was briefing us exactly how the two would sit together. So when we arrived at the dub stage, it was this kind of amazing, perfect interaction between the two things. So I don't know, that whole process was, for me, when you finish a great book, you kind of, I don't want to close this book. I still to this day, I miss those days of Blade Runner. They were some of the most exciting and inspiring.
I think it's fantastic also to hear the way that you're responding to the themes in a movie. Simply on an artistic level, I find it inspiring to be reminded time and time again how the composer, people think, you're just slapping music on at the end of a movie.
Right.
Listen to how integral and how deep your understanding of existential themes are. And then this kind of bridge you have to cross, which is translating that to music. Right. It's such a tremendous job, and so undervalued. I mean, I really love hearing you say it, and just how involved you've gotten in the narrative. People think, the guy's running and jumping, so we're going to have some chase music. Well, why is he running and jumping?
Exactly.
And it's interesting because I listened last night to, there's a couple other scores of yours that are really becoming iconic, the It scores, and we have It 2 about to, when is that?
We're recording that in 2 weeks.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Carol's crying.
You have a big fan here. Carol is here today, sitting silently and
our coordinator
and taking notes.
Good vibes.
So that note, there's one, of course, there's like, I don't know if it's a modal concept, that scale, but boy, there's a tritone or a minor second or something. It's just like, ooh, that's creepy.
It's interesting to me that it was a success back in the day. They brought it back, but now after a reboot, they're doing a sequel to a movie that already existed before. And there wasn't an It 2 before, right?
It's a bit more complex in some respect. I mean, there's a different approach. The miniseries was, the book keeps flashing between two time frames.
Okay.
And that's what happened in the miniseries. But what we did in the movie was to take just one of them, which is in the book is in the 50s, but we transposed that to the 80s. And it tells the story of the Losers Club and their first encounter with Pennywise. But it too tells the rest of the story. So we only really told half of the book in the first movie, and now we're completing the story, and it's extraordinary to.
Were you surprised by the success of this movie? I mean, it exploded.
It's very hard. I don't know, really. I mean, for me, I don't really think of movies whether it's a hit or not. It's like, it's the experience of creating this thing with my collaborators, and then if it goes on to be a huge hit, it's just this fantastic, exciting, celebration of the work we've done. But even a movie that isn't necessarily going to go on to do things like that, it's not really on my radar. But whether I was surprised, I mean, I guess because I hadn't really engaged with that world before I started working on it. When I was offered the job, I was like, okay, how am I going to read this 1,200-page book in a couple of months? And I managed to basically get through it. And I realized just the following it had and the responsibility. Like Blade Runner, there's a huge amount of expectation. But in a way, you can completely freeze if you focus on that. And again, it was just, Andy Muschietti, who I'm working with every single day right now, he's just the most incredible visionary filmmaker, like Denis, like David Sandberg. I just feel so lucky to work with these artists, these geniuses who just have such the way they can see every department in this kind of bigger picture and know how music will be a part of that. It's so inspiring, but also just story. I mean, the It movie, it's not a horror flick. It's an adventure film with some incredibly terrifying things that happen, but there's so much depth to the characters, and you really care about their own journey as a group and how the dynamics of that group and how that changes, and it's so relatable. It's musically was an incredible canvas to be in.
It's wonderful that you get to work with these directors.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting when you say it's about the work and not about the way the film performs. However, the world at large makes these very interesting judgments, I always found, about composers based on the box office of the film. Has nothing to do with the quality of the score. You're blessed with having written great music to movies that were successful, but certainly I've had to deal with directors who come in and you mention a composer's resume and they say, oh, I hated that movie. And you say, well, wait a minute.
What does that have to do with the music?
Right. The music was
Some
great.
of the best music is on bad movies.
I didn't. That movie stank. I don't want to hire the guy because... So you get to say, I mean, it's fun to even brag about it. Hey, Benjamin Wallfisch is coming in today, and he did, and you name these movies. You go, oh, that's so cool. Probably not able to sing one cue or know one bit of what the music was, but they just know those movies were cool. I mean, I think when we come back after a moment of catching our breath, we can talk a little bit about how you got to this spot and how you actually got to a spot where didn't Hellboy and Shazam come out within a minute of each other?
6 days.
And so you must have learned somewhere along the line not only the music, but how to have grace under pressure.
Yeah, a lot of late nights. So no question.
We'll when we come back, we'll get to that and much more with Benjamin Wallfisch. Stick around.
Thank you.
Hey, Score fans, it's Robert Kraft. We're back to the show in 25 seconds. If you like what you're hearing, do us a quick favor. Rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. It just takes a second, and it helps the show grow. Hey, thanks. We're going back to the show right now.
Welcome back. We're here with Benjamin Wallfisch. That is the Hidden Figures score, which is I was just telling our team, one of my favorite scores of probably the last 15, 20 years.
Thank you.
So beautiful and inspiring, and I could listen. This is like the best working music to put on. It's interesting that this is another collaboration with you and Hans,
right.
But if you put them side by side, you're like, wait, that's the same duo?
And Pharrell.
I read that Pharrell was initially the composer or the song. He was going to do songs for the film, and then you guys came on after. Can you talk about how you guys all kind of came together?
Yeah, I think Pharrell is a producer on the movie, and he
with Donna,
right? And he wrote these incredible songs for the film, and it just was this thing. You know, he and Hans go back a long way, and they're very, very close, and Hans was brought in, and then Hans just called me and said, "Hey, do you want to be a part of this band?" And I was like, "Of course." I'd just come off A Cure for Wellness, so it was good to have some uplifting. Get out of the crazy psychological drama that was as thrilling as it was to work on. And so, it was this amazing...
I like how he called it a band.
Well, that is really important to Hans's way of working, and I've since adopted that myself. This idea that, in a band, you bounce off each other, and any crazy idea is allowed. And even if it's really like, what are you talking about? Okay, let's just try it. And you just never know. And that kind of sense of just... abandoning the rules and being completely reckless with your reaching for ideas. Sometimes you come up with something so much more interesting, and then you sometimes actually no, that doesn't work. But then that might lead you down another path. And those collaborations are that kind of atmosphere is sometimes if it works for the filmmaker, it's quite fun to do. It's just why. In my writing rig, it's designed so that if a director has a note, it's very easy to immediately address it with, doing it on the fly. Anyway, it's it's one of those things where with Hidden Figures, of course, this is a story which we all felt it was such an honor to be able to tell it, frankly. Yeah. It's such an important part of history. I mean, the moon landing... The first moon landings would be impossible without these women and these African-American women who were working under Jim Crow, these genius mathematicians who were completely uncelebrated until very recently.
Unacknowledged.
Yeah. And the movie has such warmth and such incredible authenticity. And the music, of course... had to be a big part of that, and so Pharrell kind of kept us honest in that respect, in the way that he was the one who said, "No, we've got to bring in Kirk Franklin to have gospel choir."
I was wondering how the gospel choir showed up,
and it was just these kind of these
Do
little.
You want a revolution?
Why don't we try this?
Love Kirk Franklin.
Yeah, and that was our starting point, because for me, I've always loved gospel music, not only for the performance but for the harmonies, the warmth, and the depth of those chords, and. It's so unique, and I don't know, there's no way that you can't smile when you hear gospel music, and for me that's an emotion I celebrate in music. It's just the sense of benevolence and warmth. So the starting point was just these opening chords you hear on the piano, and F major is just one of those bright, friendly keys.
Even though it's a flat key.
It's weird, but for me it's like, the E major is so strange. The F major, I don't know. It's a love that.
I'd love to go through every key.
There's an
and hear
openness.
how you
It's like, okay, it's a new day, so it's brighter. But there was this kind of I don't know. The piano became important. I mean, one of the things that we started discussing was so many movies about mathematicians have this kind of minimalist. Steve Reich, Philip Glass kind of thing, which is really effective because it communicates complexity and machines, and and I love that music. But for this, it was like, these incredible women, they dance about math, and there needed to be a kind of a sense of, I'm not going to say swing because there isn't swing in the movie, but it's a freedom and a celebration. So it's an enjoyable thing. It's not just like you're a human computer, which they were. It's this sense of, what if we try this, and the fact that they were revolutionaries, and so the music sort of had to kind of capture that movement, the sense that it needed it needed to be kinetic, which is why that the main theme is that piano motif, that da 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 da. It to this day, I'm not quite sure what the time signature is. I just know that that's what it had to be. It had to be asymmetrical because it keeps you on your toes, you know.
That's such a great explanation. I don't know why it had to be, but that's what it was.
It just was, yeah.
And I love that you didn't go down the obvious path of sequential kind of, sterile mathematical sounds and music, because of course they're dealing with numbers, and here's a whole sequenced kind of eighth note thing that's layers upon itself.
Yeah.
But you went with the warmth of the characters.
Well, again, this is the great thing about, when you get those chances. I mean, I feel like, I've been mentored by Hans over all these years, and one of the things he said is, don't do that, because it will be like every other score about math. And of course, you sort of find yourself veering. So no, go away from that. You got to keep true. And that sense of when you've made a decision about a concept, kind of ruthlessly sticking to it. If it's working, if it's sticking, and it feels like it's actually becoming part of the fabric of the movie, then you sort of have to protect it almost as a concept, and then you kind of get to a place where you discover new things that you may not have done if you're trying to do too many, trying to be too tricksy. There's a sort of purity to if you have the idea, the theme, there'll be all these sort of child themes that come from that, and it will be more integrated somehow.
I like that you said theme. That's the word I always used until I started working with Hans. And Hans and John Powell and Harry use another synonym. And I never understood it because it sounded too simplistic, but I now understand. They'd say, I have to find the tune.
Right.
And so I think the tune, that's so silly. That's just kind of a little tuned. Aren't you looking for the big thematic chunk of the movie? But John Powell once said, we had a conversation about the tune, which is exactly that, which can be minor, and then it can be comic, and maybe it's in 3, and maybe it's in 4, and maybe it's orchestrated one way, and maybe it's just frivolous in another way. But once you find the tune, you're a little home free.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it must also be like casting your main actor.
Oh, perfect.
It's
great
like
analogy.
Once you have everything that actor will bring, somehow things can fall into place.
It informs you also about the character. If the actor is cast well, it can also change in some ways the feeling about the movie.
True.
The right actor.
Yeah, absolutely right. And what I've discovered is, I come from this classical background where my inclination was always towards the orchestra and towards long melodies. And actually, over the last 5 or 6 years of working on so many different genres and having to just completely start with a blank slate each time and have that terrifying experience of basically saying to yourself, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just have no idea. And going and then reading a script, and then suddenly you have all these ideas and you have your first conversations, and then you're faced with one M1 and a blank Cubase screen and a piano sketch, and then you just somehow start, and there is this wonderful kind of thing where complexity can be your enemy, and actually what is the simplest possible thing for this movie? And often it could be literally a sound. For example, Cure for Wellness, there was a huge process I went through with Gore Verbinski. It was one of the most inspiring and important periods of my life, actually, was that movie, because Gore invited me to be in his cutting rooms for nearly a year, working with him every single day. So he didn't want to use any temp at all. And so the whole thing was, I basically created the temp as suites before he'd even started cutting the film. And he used that as the temp, and then I modified. So it was this constant back and forth, and that opportunity to be next to a master filmmaker and see every single tiny iteration of this movie and why and how, and the big decisions where whole scenes were cut and then things were turned upside down and story was adapted. I learned more than that. I mean, what was funny is it was Hans who put me in that position to go and work with Gore. I met Gore and we figured it out, and he was like, okay, let's try this. And I came back and Hans said, I just sent you to film school. And it was that, because I remember before that experience with Gore, I was thinking mostly about music, composer stuff. After that, I started thinking only as a filmmaker, using music as the means, and but I didn't feel like I almost had the right before, because I didn't really have the chance to understand, not just on paper and in theory, but actually see for a year how a movie at that level is constructed, with all of the detail of the process. And also Gore is an amazing musician.
Wow.
He's someone who, he's a punk rocker. He plays the guitar. He loves music, and he has a way of describing music which is not specific about, he won't tell you which chord to use, but he'll be able to give you certain inspirational colors. And
there's not a lot of filmmakers that speak that language.
It's so interesting because you have to kind of be open to any language that's thrown at you, whether it's, the one language which I strive to get to with a filmmaker is narrative and story. Kind of everything else doesn't matter, as long as you can really understand what it is they're trying to do on that level. And that, what's most enjoyable is when a filmmaker just gives you the free rein and isn't too specific about the musical choices. But then sometimes they are. And actually working with Andy right now, he's also, I get very lucky with filmmakers who are great musicians. He's also a musician, and I can talk to him about certain harmonic choices and orchestration. He'll be like, no, the horns sound heroic. Put that on the cellos. And I was like, I think we should have sulpont cellos. Yes, sulpont cello. So sometimes you can have those very in-depth conversations, but that's not at all needed. It can just simply be like, that sounds too heroic, and that's the end. And they go, okay, my head is probably the horns. That's probably, So it really depends. But
I've actually, it's interesting. I've seen both. I've seen Ridley Scott kind of nod to Harry and say, that works. And, Harry's looking for more feedback than that. And it's just, I like where you're going, and you've been hired to do this. You're doing it. I sat with Ang Lee and Michael Dana, and Ang was very granular. And I even said to him at one point, this is so specific. He said, it's as important to me as the lighting, the costumes. Some directors are deeply involved, and Ang is brilliant with music. And do you have a preference?
I don't. I think it's just, for me, genuinely, it feels like an honor to be in the room with someone at that level. But also, I have to be their partner and their brother in arms, because music has an inordinate influence on a movie. And we wield this incredibly powerful medium which can completely change how a movie feels, from scene to scene or overall. And I don't really have a specific preference, other than it's just, as long as we as long as I can understand, and I'll do whatever I can to strive to get to that point where I really understand why there are certain choices being made. And so then I can interpret that in my own way musically, and don't really have to ask too many questions. But it really, a lot of it comes down to how much time there is. If you have the luxury of a year, then you can be, obviously much more granular. Working with David Sandberg, we've done 3 movies together, and the first 2 were horror movies, and then we did Shazam. And, even on 3 movies, we have such a shorthand. I value that relationship so much, because I know when I'm doing a David movie, there'll be just this kind of month of writing where I'll come up with, 45 minutes, an hour of music, and he'll sit down for 3 or 4 hours, listen to all of it, give me a few notes, and then that's that. And that's because, we build up that trust. And then some directors will want to get in there, have weekly playbacks, and analyze every moment. And for me, it's like, okay, that's their process.
Beautiful.
A part of it is also, and again, I think this was something I've come to realize over the last few years, is that we as composers are effectively another department. It's the experience we give a director needs to be akin to the experience they have with an editor or a color correction or a VFX. So they're in the room with the head of department, and your job is to, in your world, further their vision. And so I always think of music as something that directors should be able to touch as much as they can make an editorial change themselves, or a color change, or a VFX change, or whatever it is, ADR line. And that's where technology helps us, and the ability to call on. I use Cubase, which has a fantastic visibility function where, I mean, we have this ridiculous template which I've built up over 5 years. It's about 6,000 MIDI tracks. It's completely stupid, frankly. But I hate the idea of having an idea and then having to wait. So we have these, they're called visibility agents, where I have on my iPad set, if I want to be doing a Shazam, I had a Shazam button, press the Shazam button and it's just orchestral. But then if it's there was a Blade Runner button and it's just synths, and then there's all kinds of other combinations for action cues, then these certain tracks come up. But that also means in a playback meeting, I can have everything up at the same time and listening to, trying to get inside a director's note, and it can just be a color, this needs to be colder. And the ability to then, mute the cellos, add a little bit of, glass harmonica and some like a quiet cymbal roll and put that through a bigger reverb. You can do all that in a couple of minutes in the same way as an editor can take another version of that scene or whatever it is. So yeah, it's exciting to me to be able to, be doing this today where we have that technology where the director feels like they can touch the music as much as they can.
I think you just described also the composer's role in a way I've never heard it described, which is that analogy is classic. It's the head of the department, the way that the VFX or the lighting or the editorial, that you are realizing the vision of, it's a very production-oriented concept. And I think a lot of young composers think, I'm an artist, I'm bringing in my art, I have to express myself, and then they find out, no, actually, you're painting someone else's house.
I mean, I don't know if there is a sort of delineation, like a clear A and B. I think it's both.
It is both.
Because to really do the job, you have to have a sensibility and make artistic choices and frankly...
And express your artistic bent.
Well, it's interesting because it isn't mine, it's the movie's. And it's the idea of what can I bring... And I don't really know the answer to this, honestly, and it's very hard for me to verbalize it even when I'm working on a movie. It's just a feeling that this film gives me, and I'm going to try and put that feeling into music. And that's where it starts. And I don't know what that is. It just happens to be this thing. So in the case of it, for some reason, this very sort of strange piano piece came out. I don't know why. It was just like, okay, this is what this movie kind of came from. And then, of course, the Pennywise theme needed to be this kind of weird spidery thing that crawls in on itself. But then, and then you got to go really extreme, which is Andy's idea, oranges and lemons, for the kind of the malevolent inner workings of Pennywise's mind. But all those things they're instinctive. And I guess some people would say that's where the artist part of it comes in. I don't think of it like I'm an artist. I feel like music is this art form which we serve and we are conduits of, and it's almost like you're curating this incredible potential of music and the unbelievable breadth of possibility, and making the right choices that fit the movie's sensibilities.
That's lovely.
I wanted to ask about Shazam, and we touched on it a little bit, and you kind of touched on that you were channeling a little John Williams in that score. It's very big orchestra, superhero, but the movie it's one of these kind of self-deprecating, kind of making fun of the superhero idea, and the music could have been silly and goofy. What was the reason to go so heroic and so big with that in a movie that was kind of poking fun at itself the whole time? I
mean, first thing is, it's impossible to channel John Williams because he is his own universe, and I'm in awe of his music. I always have been, still am.
In a galaxy far away.
Well, it's incredible to be alive when there is a new John Williams score coming out this year. For me, that's just like, I celebrate that. It's just such a, and I think what he's done to film music, over his career is elevate it to something, to just a whole other level, both in pop culture, but just also in terms of music. I mean, the stuff itself is so astonishing. The writing. Sometimes I listen to pretty much any cue, but especially some stuff from the 80s or 90s, and you go, how did you do that? So just on a craft level, it's just utterly inspiring. And so that's the first thing to clarify. There's no way you can channel it. That's just, you can't touch it. But as a fan, as someone who loves that music, I remember the feeling I got as a kid and the sense of awe. And again, it's that thing of, channeling my own feeling. It's like, how do I put that sense of awe into music? And the idea is that I wouldn't say it's poking fun at itself. It's kind of celebrating the idea of a superhero movie as an incredibly lighthearted and fun experience. You're getting away from the heaviness that's happened in the last couple of decades. Nothing wrong with that. Unbelievable movies, Dark Knight, incredible trilogy. But there was something about, he's a classic superhero. He's from the Golden Age. He was created in the 30s. He's one of the very first, around the time of Superman's creation. And there was just, David really wanted to capture that sense. It's a classic Golden Age superhero. And really it was just a case of then, okay, let's really go into this, also like Back to the Future.
Nice.
That movie's, that score is so interesting because of a lot of movies, if you turn off the score, it looks so much smaller as a movie.
Yeah, the music definitely made Shazam feel huge.
Well, it would have been huge without the score for sure. But I think what was fun was, David and I were just geeking out really from day one. We had dinner, and just that was the first thing he said. Is like, what if we did a sort of classic orchestral? And it's terrifying. That brief is okay. That is going to be really hard. And luckily I had about a year to really start thinking about it. And I spent probably 2 or 3 months just trying to figure out a superhero tune. And I don't know, 20 were thrown out. And then I realized, okay, what's missing? There are 2 tunes that I needed. There's the Shazam hero theme, and then there's the transformation theme. The idea of a kid who's given superpowers, what does that feel like? This idea that this is so cool, so it's imagine you're a 12-year-old and you're given a 100-piece orchestra and like you can do whatever you want. It was that sense of just fun, I was channeling my own inner kid. Like I remember conducting some of those scoring sessions and just thinking, this is literally what I dreamed of when I was 10.
Was Lyndhurst always your destination for this score? And is that the room that you love?
I absolutely love Lyndhurst. It's a gorgeous room. I love Abbey Road 1. I love Sony, Eastwood. It's such a joy to be able to record in these spaces. Sony especially is the history there, but also Abbey Road 1. The fact that Elgar recorded there is insane. I don't know. For me, the studio is like my natural habitat. Yes. I feel most excited whenever it's probably why I'm building one, because it's just this sense of possibility and being in the room with those musicians. Honestly, that's the icing on the cake. That's all those months in a darkened room of 18-hour days, and that at the end of it, you get to work with musicians who will bring it to life, and it makes it all.
Robert teased this a little bit before we went to the break, but you had 2 films come out within a week of each other.
Right.
Were you working on those simultaneously?
No.
Okay.
No, Hellboy, actually very surprised they offered it to me because I said I have a hard out, which was August last year, because I'm doing Shazam from there. And they very kindly agreed to put in my contract that I would finish on this day, and I did. And it was before any of the VFX was done. Thank you.
It really rocks too.
It was, it's such an intense movie, and I love David Harbour's performance because there's so much irreverence. And again, it was a good chance to channel one of my other loves, which is EDM, and trying to find a place for that in a narrative film score and punk, and using an orchestra that was primarily lower instruments. But yeah, I was lucky that they agreed to the timing, because I just disappeared on August 31st.
There you were with 2 big pictures in the marketplace.
It was
and everybody
crazy.
thought, wow, did he write these at the same time?
He'd be completely screwed if you'd attempt that.
I thought you were going to say, we teased it before, you mentioned before we started recording that you came to the U.S. for a meeting on the Fox lot 11 years ago?
That's right. It was this gentleman. Oh, it's you. Sorry, terrible joke. I remember that meeting vividly. I was so nervous, but it was my first ever meeting with a Hollywood executive, and it was with you.
Oh, God, and you were. I hope I didn't disappoint. You have no choice here to say it was fabulous.
Well, it was genuinely. I just thought, how am I even taking up your time? Because at that point, I only had 2 credits, I think, and I was mostly orchestrating for my dear friend Dario.
I know I had heard something that made me call the person that said, I'd like you to meet Benjamin, that made me think, Yeah, okay.
Well,
whatever I heard, and I don't remember what it was, one of those two credits clearly piqued my interest.
I mean, it was just a thrill because I just moved to LA, and my decision to move here was really, obviously, the possibility professionally, but also I just loved the place. I loved the people. I was very lucky to come here on a job. The Soloists with Dario was conducting, and during those sessions I met so many now very dear and old friends, some people who I studied with back in the UK, now playing the orchestras, and there was this kind of wonderful community. I mean, the film music community here is amazing, and it's rich and supportive and fascinating people, and everyone loves this craft that we are all beavering away at, trying to, improve and change, and so I felt that, and you don't really feel that in London. London's amazing because it's just, it's like New York. There's just this explosion of meat culture, but LA, it's very focused on this thing, which as a kid I was always the most fascinated with. So so I made that decision to move, which of course isn't that easy. Got to get a visa and all the rest of it, but I managed to make it happen. And then do you want to go meet the president of Fox Music? Okay, sure. But it was one of those. What I remember about the meeting was, firstly, it was so hot, and you had a room which was very comfortable, very cool, and there was this kind of like walking into the room was into this like sanctuary of interesting. You had lots of really interesting things in the room, and we had. I don't know. Maybe this is just me imagining.
What happened at the sanctuary?
I had a wonderful office at Fox.
It was pretty cool.
I also kept everything, all the swag, all the little tchotchkes, all the things that I'd been given, I put up on those shelves.
Yeah,
and so there always was toys and photographs and souvenirs.
It was quite distracting because I was like, how am I, going to get this guy to hire me, as a little kid with no credits, and of course the only way is to just completely ignore all of that. And I just really wanted to talk about what was in the room. But it was, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because in London that doesn't really happen. You don't just go and meet. It's normally about something specific. So I was really, I was taken by the generosity.
Well, I remember one other aspect, which is actually I don't want to forget before we close up to ask. I remember one of the other aspects of what I was told about you that interested me, which is that you came from a significant musical family. And that appealed to me, that you had it in you. It wasn't just, here's the next student from a music school who just wants to be a composer. This is somebody who's genetically and ancestrally related to music. And that, I thought, let's meet this guy. That sounds like
can you tell a little bit about your background?
Yes, please.
I mean, my family is just this incredibly. I mean, we come from music is like part of our culture. I know. I mean, it's my grandfather was a concert pianist, and my grandmother, Anita, who's still alive. Excuse me. She's a Holocaust survivor, and she played the reason she's alive was because she played the cello in the women's orchestra at Auschwitz, and sort of having that history in your family where music plays that much of an important role, there is a through line. My siblings are both musicians. My parents are both string players. And my dad especially, I think, has had the biggest influence on me in terms of work ethic. He's someone who to this day practices the cello 6 hours a day. And I remember as a kid going in when he was practicing the Shostakovich cello concerto for the 10,000th time, going, don't you know that yet? It's like, how many times? But that sort of sense that, no, there's still something to learn, something to discover. And the love, I mean, he's never lost his love of the process of, getting to a point where he can perform something involves this amount of time of work and prep. So there's music for me, I mean, what was, I guess, a bit uncomfortable internally was, I went down the classical path for a long time as a conductor, but it was that kind of internal struggle of what I really loved and was most fascinated with is film music. And there's, I remember it was almost like, going to my parents and saying, I'm going to stop conducting now. And I was like, is that okay with you? And they were like, of course, do your. That's great. But it's that because when you have those number of generations of classical musicians, there's that kind of almost sense that you need to keep the family business going in a way.
I was going to ask, was there a lot of pressure on you to deliver? I mean, when your whole family does this,
I think you put a lot of pressure on yourself. I mean, especially I'm the eldest sibling of 3, and I don't know. There must be something in that. I've always put a huge amount of pressure on myself to really try and realize my, whatever it is that's inside. And honestly, there's, the sheer focus on the work and never letting the pressure off, pursuing every day just something a little bit better than the day before. Again, being inspired by my dad and my grandpa, who was the same thing. He practiced every day, Schubert, Brahms, Beethoven, and he would spend 3 hours on one run, and just so that he got the right tone. Just little things like that. There's a kind of that influences you, and I just feel so lucky that for whatever reason, I can write music, and music is the culture and language of my family. So I feel, just honored in a way that I get to do that every day, and also do it in such a way that it never gets boring, because I'm collaborating and bringing music to something much bigger than music.
I always like to ask, what do you listen to? Like if you turned on your iPod, what did you drive over here listening to?
I'm really weird in that I rarely listen to music for pleasure. I mean, it's a terrible thing to admit, but every day
you like the silence.
Well, it really, because I get ideas. Actually, I get some of my best. If I'm going to call them my best, for me, I hate saying my best just because often. Anyway, I'm not going to leave the insecurity. But the point is, the ideas which tend to survive often happen when I'm driving, really weirdly, and I always have my little voice recorder ready to go just in case.
Maybe that's why you like LA, because you're sitting in the car all the time.
There's a lot of that. There is, but it's. I mean, when I do listen, it's often for a very specific reason, and of course, I mean, I really love listening to jazz, but not like. I mean, like really experimental, where you can hear a musician just kind of going off on one at 3 a.m. in a half drunk and stupid sometimes in New York in the 60s, whatever it was. But they come up with these chords, and it's like, what? And they don't even know necessarily what it is. It's that freedom of approach. And whenever I'm writing, the very first thing I do is I'll sit down at the piano and just improvise. And and it's chords. It actually starts with harmony always. It's rare that it starts with a melody. And finding interesting intervallic relationships between notes that, and the keyboard too. I think of music very much in terms of the keyboard rather than as dots. And it's like a friend, the piano. There's always a piano in the house when I was growing up, and I'd just go and sit down and play, annoying all my piano teachers because I'd never practiced what it was they wanted.
I love hearing this.
But you're playing jazz for them.
Well, definitely not as good as jazz, but just something, just inventing. And I remember as a young kid, it was the Moonlight Sonata, and there are 2 chords in the Moonlight Sonata because you're in C sharp minor, and he goes to A major, and then D major in the first inversion, so you got F sharp up, and then it was the progression of that D major to A flat 7, which is this tritone relationship, right? But he does it with this voicing where he just changes in this gorgeously elegant way. And I just remember as a kid, I had no idea what that was. I just remember learning it, and every time I did those 2 chords, something happened inside. I just felt something, so what would happen is I'd just, okay, what happens if you do this, and then what happens if you transpose it, and I'd spend 2 or 3 hours just like discovering something, and then of course you learn, okay, it's because of the tritone relationship, and it's a Neapolitan cadence, all these words, this theory, and then but what's really fascinating is that as a kid, sometimes you don't need to know any of that technical stuff. You respond to your own emotional, like chords and harmonies. They do things to you.
I love that.
Well, I think that's what's important about film music is you don't have to be a classically trained musician to feel emotion from the chord change of certain keys or whatever. Like that's what's important about music is humans can understand the music without really knowing what it's doing.
But you definitely need a composer that understands it. And I think it's just the world is starting to enjoy, everything that you discovered. It's just great that you're sharing it. And I love the way you talk about it. When you talk about the piano as a friend, it just kind of warms me because I know that feeling, particularly when you're little.
Right.
And there's something in the room that you can go to even when you're sad or when you want to just express something. Having that relationship to a piano can, and in your case did, blossom into, oh, by the way, you're in Hollywood. You're making movie music now. That relationship all paid off. And I think it's just fabulous. Benjamin, it's so great to have you here. I'm so happy to be able to hear what's happened over the last 11 years.
Thank you.
That was a lucky meeting, and I clearly missed the possibility of hiring you. Right.
No, it's a really good job you didn't. It would have been wouldn't it?
I can't remember. I mean, it's good that you said it was sort of a general because I cannot remember if it was on a specific film or the person introduced us said, you should just know this person. And I've had those kind of meetings occasionally where they just evaporate. And then once in a while somebody comes to me and says, what you just did, which is here you are 11 years later and you're crushing it. Hey,
well, thank you.
Oh, it's great.
No, I mean,
Thank you.
What can I say? It's so great to talk to you guys, and I have hugely fond memories of that meeting. It stood out.
I feel like our mics are picking up a radio signal.
I think
do I hear Jordan Bieber or something?
It might be Jordan Bieber. Is it the It 2 score is being channeled through, or is it just kind of a Wi-Fi freakout? The good news is we've got
two words for you.
Jordan Bieber. Thank you so much. The really great news is we've gotten to spend an hour with Benjamin Wallfisch.
Yeah, Ben, thank you so much. And
Thanks,
we're really looking forward to It 2. Is there anything else you're working on that you can say? Or are you just working on maybe a vacation after that?
I'm just thinking, actually, no, I can't talk about
I know what you're working on that you can't say. You're working on a studio.
Well, there is that, yes. That is probably the biggest project.
The scoring lab.
Yeah, that's going to be...
Scoring lab. But, again, we were trying to make this work, and we really appreciate during the construction and all the amazing work you've been doing for coming on the show.
Next time we'll do this in the scoring lab.
Great
That's
stuff.
right. Reminder to our listeners to follow us on Twitter @ScoreThePodcast, and please rate and review the show. Give us a 5-star rating if you like what you're hearing. It helps the show grow.
And grow some more. Thank you so much, and great morning with Benjamin. Thank you so much. From Kraft Box Studios, I'm Robert Kraft.
Kenny Holmes, and thank you, Carol, too. Ben, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.